Welcome to the NBAVE podcast.
Coming to you on February 7th, 2024. This is one day before the NBA trade deadline. So we're going to do a quick look around the league, and then I listened to a little bit of what Bill Simmons put out this morning on his podcast, which was a full 75-player plus 25-player bonus. So in total, 100-player trade value ranking. And I don't really think that that's appropriate for right now. I don't think we need to see a trade value ranking of all the top 100 players with value in the league right now because most of the players on that list aren't going to be traded. It doesn't matter how high Tyrese Halliburton's trade ranking is if nobody's trading for him. Or Anthony Edwards. Like, what's the difference? Or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I think what's a little bit more interesting to look at right now is who are the players who should be traded, right? Who are the guys who we expect will be traded or should be traded by tomorrow at 3 p.m.? Right? I believe that's the trade deadline, 3 p.m. Maybe that's my time out here on the West Coast. But who are the guys who we want to see traded? Who are the players who, if a team does not trade them, then they'll be making a big mistake because certain contracts are expiring and certain seasons are already written off. There are teams that we know are not going to be anywhere come playoff time. So now's the time to look at those players. Let's make a shorter list of those players, not necessarily a list of 100 guys in the league who have good value. And let's just first quickly run around the NBA. We had the Pacers handling business against the Rockets, the Knicks doing what they needed to do against the Grizzlies. The Heat stayed awake yesterday. They beat the Magic, so now the Heat and the Magic are right around the same spot. They may even be tied with the exact same odds, and they are 27 and 24 for the Heat and the Magic in a 7th/8th seed tie. So good job there by the Heat staying awake for a game for a change. And then we had the Mavericks handling business in Brooklyn against the Nets. And then if you listen to this show every day, you already knew we were on these games because we've been talking about two of the top teams in the Western Conference, the Timberwolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder. And we highlighted the issues that both of these teams have at the end of games. They're a little bit different than each other. The Timberwolves don't have the same problem that the Thunder have, and vice versa, but the Timberwolves issue is they struggle at the end of the close game, and they turn the ball over, and they don't get good shots between Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. Edwards goes a little silent, and they give up leads right at the end of the game when they need to hold on. They did that exact same thing yesterday. They outscored the Bulls by a lot in the first half, and then the Bulls reversed the tables on them in the third and fourth quarters, sent the game into overtime, and then in overtime the Bulls pulled away for the victory. And it was on the back of Kobe White going absolutely nuclear. Absolutely nuclear. It's probably his best game of the season. And when you have that happening one day before the trade deadline or 2 days before the trade deadline was actually when the game happened, he's given you a lot to think about in terms of sending other players out and building around this guy. But we highlighted exactly what the Timberwolves' struggle would be. We said that they have a penchant for blowing these type of games. And then the Thunder, we were on this as well. We've highlighted in the recent days and weeks how the Thunder don't have quite the same problem as the Timberwolves because they know exactly who's going to be shooting all the shots at the end of the game, which is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, or at least who's going to be handling the ball and setting up all the plays at the end of the game. They know who the offense is going to run through. And he's great at the end of ball games, but they have not so many consistent players around him who can sink the shot in the final few minutes. So it ends up being a similar problem to the Timberwolves, but a bit of a different way of getting there. Where the Timberwolves struggle, where they have Towns and Edwards and not really sure who to work through at the end of the game. And Edwards ends up going a little more silent than he should, and Towns ends up taking tougher shots than he should. The Thunder have the opposite issue. They have a guy who they are very comfortable with running the end of the ball games, but when the double team comes over to him, It's just tough for him to know where to go with the ball, who can really be relied upon. Not Josh Giddey yet, not Chet Holmgren yet, and the options are just a little slimmer. So the Jazz beating the Thunder, and then you have the Suns able to score the victory at home, where they usually do win, against the Bucks, who were playing without Damian Lillard last night. So Doc Rivers is like 1-4 or 1-5 in his first 5-6 games coaching the Milwaukee Bucks, and now he's going to be the year coach of the Eastern Conference All-Star Game. Absolutely laughable. But let's get into the list. We took 5 minutes. We went through the league. Now let's get into our list of players who have got to be traded. Players who you should really think about trading. Now, I'm going to start off this list with someone who really doesn't 100% have to be traded, but this is really a player who you got to think about. And that's Cleveland Cavaliers trading Darius Garland. There's a good chance they're not going to do this. But why am I bringing this up? I really want to talk about players who really should and could be traded. But I'm putting Darius Garland here because the Cleveland Cavaliers have gone on 2 massive win streaks, and they're tied for second, where they actually are, now that Milwaukee lost last night, they're actually firmly in the 2 seed. They are half a game up on Milwaukee and a half a game up on the New York Knicks. So the Cavaliers are literally the 2 seed. And Darius Garland has barely played during these 2 win streaks. He was out almost that entire time. Now, his contract, Darius Garland's contract, is actually worse than Donovan Mitchell's contract. Darius Garland is getting paid a drop more than Donovan Mitchell is this year. He's getting paid about $1 million more. Garland's getting $34 million. Mitchell's getting $33 million. Fast forward to next season, Garland will be getting $36.75 million. Donovan Mitchell will be getting $35.5 million. Fast forward a year after that, Garland will be getting $39.5 million, and Mitchell will be getting $37 million. And that's the end of where Mitchell's contract is. Mitchell has this year and then 2 more seasons after that. Garland has this year, those 2 seasons after that, and then after Donovan Mitchell's contract is done, Garland still has another 2 seasons where he'll be making $42 million. And then in his final season, it goes up another $2 million and change to almost $45 million. So when you think about the team, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and how they've gone on these 2 massive win streaks, and they've vaulted themselves up, propelled themselves to the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference without Darius Garland for almost all of those games, you've got to think this is really, these are 2 players who just do the same thing. They play virtually the same exact role, and they make each other redundant. And when you have Donovan Mitchell propelling the Cavaliers to a place where they've never been, this is the best the Cavaliers have been in the last several seasons, during this last 30-game stretch or so. And then you look over at Darius Garland, who's going to be paid more handsomely than Donovan Mitchell will. You've got to think maybe we should trade Garland because Mitchell's the better player. Mitchell's the player who you're going to want to build around over Garland. So now is an incredible opportunity to maybe try trading Darius Garland. That's the first player on this list. Then we go to, and we're mostly going to be focusing on teams who are the teams giving away players, the teams who have players who other teams will covet. So we're not going to be talking about the LA Clippers. We're not going to be talking about the Thunder or the Timberwolves or the Nuggets because they have their teams pretty much set. Milwaukee has their team. They don't have players who they're looking to send out. They have players who they're looking to get. So we're going to be focusing on the teams who have the players to send away. Starting with the Chicago Bulls. And the most must-trade player in the league right now, in my opinion, is DeMar DeRozan. He's getting paid over $28.5 million this season, and his contract is expiring. The Bulls are near the bottom of the Eastern Conference. How would Chicago be able to look themselves in the mirror with a 34-year-old DeRozan, contract expiring, not trying their best to send him out for anything? Send him out. Do whatever you have to do. Send him out. Bring on an asset. Bring on another bad contract in place of him for the duration of the season. Doesn't matter. You are firmly in a mode where you got to rebuild the team around Kobe White right now. One thing that Bill Simmons said that I agreed with is the Bulls are just they're obsessed with being a play-in team. How much can you love being a part of the play-in tournament? Do you have any aspirations of actually being a team that can make it to the second round of the playoffs or the conference finals or the finals? Because if you do, it's time to part with DeMar DeRozan. He's entering the sunset of his career. He's 34 years old, and you 100% have got to trade him right here, right now. This is it. You got to trade him for anything that you can get. Then we have Patrick Williams' contract on the Bulls also expiring. I know he's not going to be in the same class as DeMar DeRozan, but you got to send him out. Send him out for second-round picks. It doesn't matter. Patrick Williams isn't doing anything for you. Get him out of here. Then you have Andre Drummond, contract expiring. He's only making $3.3 million. Get him out of there. Get him out. Send him away to some team who's going to want him to fill out the bench role for a contender. Get him out of there. These are players who you've got to do your best to trade. Then we move on to the Brooklyn Nets, another massive trade destination. They have Spencer Dinwiddie. He's making $20 million, and he's expiring. You've got to trade Spencer Dinwiddie to a contender who's looking for a sixth man, a point guard coming off the bench. You also have Nick Claxton and Royce O'Neal, both making just under $10 million a year. Nick Claxton, I don't care if you want to re-sign him in the offseason. Trade him out, bring on assets, bring on more draft capital, and sign him in the offseason if you really want to. Holding on to him right now doesn't do anything. Royce O'Neal, same thing. Get him out of there. He's 30 years old. A lot of teams want him. He looks good. He has a good three-point shot. He's big body. So many contenders could use him right now. The Brooklyn Nets aren't a contender. They have literally no use for the guy. And then you have another great player to trade, Lonnie Walker. He's making $2 million. He's on a 1-year contract. He's 25 years old. His contract is expiring. Just look at what Lonnie Walker did last year for the Los Angeles Lakers. They had a game against the Warriors, which is basically known as the Lonnie Walker game. And without Walker, they probably don't win that game, and maybe they lose the series. The whole thing shifted because of Lonnie Walker and what he did at the end of the ball game. If I was a Lakers fan, I would cut off my foot. I would cut off a couple of toes to have Lonnie Walker back on the team over some of the other guys filling out this bench right now. Get him out of here. Trade him. Bring on assets who are going to be here to help you build your future if you're Brooklyn. Got to trade Lonnie Walker. Then moving on to one of the other great teams that have players to send out. Toronto Raptors. You can send out Bruce Brown. He's on a 2-year contract right now, so he's not expiring, but he's got 2 years. If you want to trade him, trade him. But more importantly, you got to trade Gary Trent. He's a 3-point machine. His contract is expiring. He's making less than $20 million. You got to send him out and see what you can bring back in place of him. Thaddeus Young is probably not a guy who many teams are going to want, but you could trade him at $8 million for an expiring contract. And then you also have Otto Porter. I don't know if he's injured for the rest of the year or not, but if he's able to get back on the court, you've got to think a team like the Warriors or some other team is going to be willing to give you second-round picks for him. He's making $6.3 million, and he's expiring, so just get back what you can for him. And then they have Emmanuel Quickley, also expiring. If you want him back next season, sign him in the offseason. For now, send him out. Get a first-round pick for him. And then they also have at the bottom of their rotation, Garrett Temple, who another veteran team, maybe the Denver Nuggets, who knows, maybe a veteran team would like to fill out the edges of their bench with Garrett Temple. So trade him for whatever you can get. He's an asset, maybe a small asset, but bring back an asset in exchange for him that's going to take you beyond this year. Then you have Miles Bridges for the Hornets. You got to find a landing spot for him. You got to trade him out. There's plenty of teams who want him, despite his history of off-the-court issues. You have Tyus Jones on the Washington Wizards. The Washington Wizards have a few guys. They have Jordan Poole and they have Kyle Kuzma, but those guys have a bunch of years left on their contract. Tyus Jones is a guy who's going to expire, and the Wizards can't keep allowing players to expire on their contracts. They've got to trade these guys out and start building a brighter future. Tyus Jones is a player who's massive coming off the bench. What he did for Memphis last season in all of the games that he was able to start in place of the injured Ja Morant was unbelievable. He's a player who can run your offense. He can do similar to what a TJ McConnell does in Indiana. He plays so well for them, and he's able to fill in anytime Tyrese Halliburton is out. Tyus Jones does the same thing. He's such an asset if you have an injury-prone point guard, or if you need someone just to play great bench minutes and lead the second unit if you're a contender. Then we go over to one of the dumpsters, absolute trash heap of the NBA, which is the Detroit Pistons. They have Joe Harris on an expiring contract, but nobody's going to want him. They have James Wiseman on an expiring contract, but nobody's going to want him. They have Alec Burks and Monty Morris. Both of them are making about $10 million, and both of those guys are players that teams will want. They will want Alec Burks. He's a 32-year-old veteran who can hit the three-point shot. The Knicks have expressed interest in bringing him back. I don't know if that's a good idea for them, but there's interest around the league. And with Burks and Monty Morris's contracts expiring, the Detroit Pistons have to let these guys go. Get him out of there. Same thing for Gallinari. If he's going to be on the court at any point this season, get him off the roster. Do what you have to do. Take the second-round picks, maybe a first-round pick. I don't know. That's up to them. But it's time to get him out of here in exchange for players who can be in the future. Draft picks who can help build your future. Then, moving on to the Utah Jazz, you have the Kelly Olynyk piece. You got to trade him out of there. Kelly Olynyk is a veteran player who means a ton. Just ask Boston. He meant so much when he was on their team. Look at how he impacts Utah. He's a big man who hits the three, who passes the ball extremely well. He can slide right into so many playoff contenders' rotations right now and make a massive difference. Then the Utah Jazz are constantly floating Jordan Clarkson. But he's on such a good contract, and you have him for the next few seasons. It might not be worth trading him. He's a guy who every team in the league should want on the contract that he's on right now. So I would say Utah can hold on to him. You don't need to trade him. Moving on to Memphis, they have one expiring contract who a lot of teams would want right now, and that's Xavier Tillman. Tillman is a young player who plays like a veteran. He's a young guy who carries himself. He's solid. He can be relied upon for baskets to, when your team is having a run against them, he can calm things down. He's reliable. He has a good shot. He plays good defense. He's a guy who Memphis can really trade away and bring assets back in exchange for. And then we have the Portland Trailblazers. And I'm bringing Portland up mostly as some comic relief to close things out. Just listen to the contracts that they have. They have DeAndre Ayton signed for this season and then the next two after that for between $32 and $36 million per year. If I was a Blazers fan, I would just read those contract numbers and weep. A brutal contract. Then they have Jeremy Grant, signed for between $27.5 and $36.5 million for this year and 4 more seasons. It's a tough contract when he's your best player. Real tough. You have Anthony Simons making between $24 and $28 million for this season and the next 2. And he just doesn't get the job done. You have Malcolm Brogdon at $22.5 million for this season and the next. He's a player the Blazers should really look to trade. You have Robert Williams for this season and then the next 2 who can't stay on the court. You have Matisse Thybulle making over $10 million for the next 3 seasons. You have Scoot Henderson going to be here for the next 4, and he's yet to show anything. You have Shaedon Sharpe, who you hope the Blazers can develop. And that's pretty much it. The Blazers are in extreme need, more than any other team, of a guy who can come in here and change the culture. The Blazers, through the whole Terry Stotts era in Portland with Damian Lillard and with CJ McCollum, proved that they were unable to develop any of their own talent. Throughout that whole duration, they couldn't develop one good player. Outside of the one Damian Lillard who was on the team for forever, they couldn't develop anyone to help him. And I think that there is a solution. There's one player that they can trade for and bring in, and I think it could happen if they wanted to, and that would be to bring Chris Paul in to Portland. Because the Warriors have Chris Paul, and the Trailblazers have guys like Jeremy Grant and Malcolm Brogdon who they can make work in terms of the salary and bring Chris Paul in. Now, you might be like, what is Chris Paul going to do on Portland? They have a point guard in Simons. What's Chris Paul going to do? And I will say that Chris Paul's greatest attribute throughout his NBA career was not taking a really good team and bringing them over the top and winning a championship. He actually failed at doing that. His years on the Clippers and his seasons on the Rockets when they had chances to win titles didn't result in titles. And Chris Paul often folded in some of the biggest moments of pressure. But what did he do incredibly well, better than any player I've ever seen, was that he could come into a destroyed franchise and completely change the culture and make them a winning team. He did that with OKC before Gilgeous-Alexander was the player that he is now. He was a throw-in into that trade to make salaries work. He went over to OKC, and he turned their team around. They made the playoffs. And he did the same thing with Phoenix. Phoenix had Devin Booker on their team for a bunch of seasons and couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't get out of the basement until they brought Chris Paul into the equation, and he changed around their whole culture. And he turned Devin Booker into a winner. And they made it to an NBA Finals, and they were one of the top teams in the West when Chris Paul was there. And then Chris Paul was able to instill that culture, and he moved on to another team. He got traded away, but the culture remained. And now the Phoenix Suns are a really good team. If I was the Portland Trailblazers, I don't think the coaching staff is enough to instill this culture right now. They're not developing good talent. I would trade away some of these big contracts to the Warriors, and I would bring in a guy who can really change the culture and help develop their young players at the same cost that they're paying their guys right now to be in the basement. That's what I would do if I was Portland. That's pretty much the list of players. So just to run through the list again from top to bottom: Darius Garland. Then from the Bulls, we have DeMar DeRozan, Patrick Williams, and Andre Drummond. From the Brooklyn Nets, Spencer Dinwiddie, Nick Claxton, Royce O'Neal, Lonnie Walker. From Toronto, Gary Trent, Otto Porter, Emmanuel Quickley, and Garrett Temple. Miles Bridges from the Hornets, Tyus Jones from the Wizards. Then from the Pistons, Alec Burks, Monty Morris, and Gallo. Bojan Bogdanovic, who has 2 years left, is also an option. Kelly Olynyk from Utah, Xavier Tillman from Memphis, and the Blazers to try and do something big to set their organization in the right direction. In terms of games, we have 7 games coming up tonight on February 7th. We have the Raptors playing the Hornets in a game no one will watch. Cleveland will mop the floor with the Washington Wizards in Washington. And then the Hawks are going to try to challenge the Celtics. They just challenged the Clippers and made it close. And they'll try to challenge the Celtics in Boston tonight again. Then you have the Warriors facing off against the Sixers. The Warriors just beat the Sixers a couple of games ago, and they'll do it again tonight in Philadelphia, where Embiid's not going to play. The Spurs are going to go face off against the Heat. The Heat should be able to continue their winning ways against San Antonio tonight at home. The Pistons are going to go lose in Sacramento tonight against the Kings. And then the Pelicans are going to take their hot and cold nature and try to challenge the Clippers, who are currently tied for the top team in the West. It's a 4-way tie. You have the Clippers, Nuggets, Timberwolves, and Thunder. Throughout the duration of the season, I would look for the Nuggets and the Clippers to take the 1 and 2 spot, and for the Timberwolves and the Thunder. The Timberwolves and Thunder with their struggle closing ball games, the Timberwolves and Thunder should drop a little lower in the standings, and rightfully so. So that's what we have coming up on the docket. We are NBAV, NBAVE. Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on social media. And you can email the show at NBAVE. That's NBAV. Sorry, NBAVENUE, NBAVENUE at yahoo.com. Send us your questions and comments. Like some of our great listeners, like we have Eli Rosh, a big time listener of the podcast, part of the marketing team. And we will catch you on the next one.